I will never forget the sound of my husband's voice when he said those words in front of everyone. The girl is not my daughter. The courtroom went silent. My heart stopped. I looked at him, this man I'd shared a bed with for 12 years, this man who'd held our daughter when she was born, who'd stayed up with her through fevers and nightmares, and I saw a stranger. But what he didn't know, what no one in that room knew except me and the judge, was that he just made the biggest mistake of his life. Let me take you back to the beginning, to when everything still made sense. My name is Sarah, and I met Daniel when I was 23. He was everything I thought I wanted, confident, ambitious, charming in that effortless way that made everyone in the room gravitate toward him. He worked in finance, wore expensive watches, and always knew the right thing to say at dinner parties. We got married 2 years later in a ceremony that cost more than my first car. His parents paid for everything. They were old money, the kind of family that had portraits in the hallway and a legacy to protect. I should have seen the warning signs then, the way his mother looked at me like I was a temporary inconvenience, the way his father asked about my breeding at the rehearsal dinner. But I was in love. Or at least, I thought I was. When I got pregnant with Emma, Daniel seemed happy. He painted the nursery himself, a soft lavender that I'd picked out from dozens of samples. He came to every ultrasound, held my hand during the delivery, cried when they placed her in his arms for the first time. "She has your eyes," he whispered to me that day, his voice thick with emotion. Emma did have my eyes, dark brown, almost black, with long lashes that curled naturally. She had my olive skin tone, my thick hair, my small nose. She looked nothing like Daniel, who was pale and blonde with sharp Nordic features. But genetics are funny that way, or so I thought. My grandmother had been Italian, my mother's side of the family all dark-featured. It made sense that Emma would take after them. For the first few years, everything was fine. Daniel was a good father, or at least he played the part well. He came home for dinner most nights, read Emma bedtime stories, took her to the park on weekends. We looked like the perfect family in our perfect house in our perfect neighborhood. Then things started to change. It began with small things. Daniel working later hours. Phone calls he'd take in the other room. A distance in his eyes when he looked at me, like he was calculating something. When Emma turned 5, he started making comments about her appearance. "She really doesn't look like me at all, does she?" he'd say, laughing, but there was something sharp underneath. "Are you sure the hospital didn't mix up the babies?" I'd laugh it off, make jokes about recessive genes, remind him that she had his stubbornness and his love of numbers. But the comments kept coming, more frequent, more pointed. One night, I found him staring at baby photos of Emma on his phone, comparing them to pictures of himself as a child. He didn't notice me in the doorway. "Daniel?" I said softly. He jumped, almost dropping the phone. "Just looking at old pictures," he said quickly, but his expression was guilty. That's when the real nightmare began. 2 weeks later, I came home from work to find Daniel in the kitchen with papers spread across the table. Official-looking documents with letterheads and signatures. "What's all this?" I asked, setting down my purse. He looked up at me, and his face was different. Cold. "I had a paternity test done." The words hit me like a physical blow. "You what?" "A paternity test. For Emma." He said it so calmly, like he was discussing the weather. "I took samples to a lab 3 weeks ago. The results came back today." My hands started shaking. "Daniel, what are you talking about? Why would you?" "According to these results," he interrupted, tapping the papers, "I am not Emma's biological father." The room tilted. I grabbed the counter to steady myself. "That's impossible. You know that's impossible. You're the only man I've ever." The science doesn't lie, Sarah. His voice was ice. The DNA test shows zero paternity match. Which means you've been lying to me for 6 years. I haven't lied about anything. My voice was rising, panic flooding through me. There must be a mistake. Those tests can be wrong, they can contaminate samples, I used one of the most reputable labs in the state. He stood up, gathering the papers. I'm filing for divorce. And I'm going to make sure everyone knows what you did. I couldn't breathe. This couldn't be happening. Daniel, please, let's talk about this. Let's get another test. Let me see those results. But he was already walking out of the kitchen. My lawyer will be in touch. I want you out of this house by the end of the month. The divorce proceedings were brutal. Daniel's family had money and influence, and they used both. His lawyer painted me as an adulteress, a liar, a woman who trapped their son with another man's child. I hired the best lawyer I could afford, which wasn't much compared to Daniel's legal team. I insisted on my innocence, demanded retesting, but Daniel refused. He said he had all the proof he needed. The worst part was Emma. She was too young to understand the details, but she knew something was wrong. She knew her daddy had moved out, knew he wasn't coming to her dance recitals anymore, knew that when he did see her during scheduled visits, he was distant and cold. "Why doesn't Daddy love me anymore?" she asked me one night, tears streaming down her face. I held her and lied through my teeth. "He does love you, baby. He's just going through a hard time right now." But I was terrified. If Daniel could convince a judge that he wasn't Emma's father, he might not have to pay child support. Worse, he might be able to walk away from her completely, leaving my daughter to grow up thinking her father had abandoned her because she wasn't good enough. The custody hearing was scheduled for a Tuesday in November. I barely slept the night before. I wore a simple navy dress, nothing flashy. My lawyer, Mrs. Chin, had coached me on what to say, how to act. "Be honest, be calm, and don't let them see you break," she'd said. "We'll request a court-ordered paternity test. The truth will come out." But I was terrified of what truth that might be. What if somehow, impossibly, Daniel was right? What if there had been some mistake at the hospital? What if? No. I pushed the thoughts away. I knew the truth. Daniel was Emma's father. He had to be. The courtroom was smaller than I'd expected, wood-paneled and formal. Daniel sat across the aisle with his lawyer, a sharp-faced woman in an expensive suit. He wouldn't look at me. The judge was an older black woman with silver hair and reading glasses hanging on a chain around her neck. Judge Morrison. She had a reputation for being fair but tough. Daniel's lawyer went first, presenting the paternity test results, spinning a story about my supposed infidelity, my deception. I sat there listening to myself being painted as a villain, and I wanted to scream. When it was my turn to speak, my voice shook. "Your Honor, I don't know what happened with that test, but I swear to you, Daniel is Emma's father. I have never been unfaithful. Never. I'm asking for a court-ordered test so we can settle this once and for all." Judge Morrison looked at me over her glasses. "Mrs. Walker, do you have any proof of your fidelity? Any evidence to counter these test results?" "Just my word, Your Honor. And 6 years of being a faithful wife." Daniel's lawyer stood up. "Your Honor, my client has provided scientific evidence." Mrs. Walker's word against DNA testing is hardly. "I'll decide what's relevant, Counselor," Judge Morrison said sharply. Then she turned to Daniel. "Mr. Walker, I'd like to ask you a few questions." Daniel stood, confident and composed. This was his element, boardrooms and negotiations, winning through charm and strategy. Mr. Walker, you claim this child is not yours. Is that correct? Yes, Your Honor. The paternity test proves it. And you're absolutely certain you want to make this claim? You understand the implications? I do, Your Honor. I was deceived into believing I was the father, and I want that deception on record. Judge Morrison nodded slowly. So, to be clear, you are stating under oath, in this court, that Emma Walker is not your biological daughter? Daniel's jaw tightened. That's correct, Your Honor. The girl is not my daughter. The words hung in the air like poison. I felt something break inside me. Not my heart, that had already shattered. Something deeper. My faith in humanity, maybe. My belief that the man I'd loved could have any decency left. But then I saw it. The smallest flicker of something on Judge Morrison's face. Not surprise. Something else. Recognition, maybe. Or satisfaction. She shuffled through some papers on her bench, then looked up. Mr. Walker, I find your testimony very interesting. Especially in light of some information I received this morning. Daniel's lawyer frowned. Your Honor, I'm not sure what. Yesterday evening, Judge Morrison continued, I received a call from a Dr. Patricia Hernandez at Metropolitan General Hospital. She was very concerned about this case. Concerned enough to break her evening plans and dig through archived hospital records from 6 years ago. My heart started pounding. Metropolitan General was where I'd given birth to Emma. Dr. Hernandez was the attending physician during Emma Walker's delivery, the judge continued. And she remembered something unusual about that birth. Something that stuck with her all these years. Daniel had gone very still. You see, Mr. Walker, during the delivery, there were complications. Mrs. Walker began hemorrhaging, and Dr. Hernandez had to perform an emergency procedure. During that chaos, a nurse made a mistake. She labeled the blood samples incorrectly. I was holding my breath. That blood sample ended up in your daughter's file, Mr. Walker. Your wife's blood type is O negative. But the sample in Emma's file read B positive. Which would have been genetically impossible given your blood type and your wife's. I don't understand, Daniel said, but his voice had lost its confidence. Dr. Hernandez caught the error 2 days later and corrected the file, but she never forgot it. And when she heard about this case through a colleague, you see, hospital staff talk, Mr. Walker, especially about dramatic paternity disputes, she decided to investigate. Judge Morrison picked up a paper. She pulled the corrected records. Emma Walker's actual blood type is A positive, which is entirely consistent with having you and Mrs. Walker as parents. The color was draining from Daniel's face. But more importantly, the judge continued, her voice hardening, Dr. Hernandez wondered why you were so convinced the child wasn't yours. So she did some digging into the lab you used for your paternity test. Oh God. I could barely breathe. Turns out Gene Lab Solutions has been under investigation for falsifying test results. They were shut down 3 weeks ago by the state medical board. Apparently, they had a lucrative side business providing fake paternity tests for men who wanted to avoid child support or get out of marriages. The courtroom erupted. Daniel's lawyer was on her feet, objecting. My lawyer was gripping my arm. But I couldn't move, couldn't speak. Your Honor, this is highly irregular, Daniel's lawyer began. What's irregular, Judge Morrison said, her voice cutting through the noise like a blade, is a father standing in my courtroom and denying his own child based on a fraudulent test from a corrupt lab. What's irregular is a man who would destroy his daughter's sense of identity and security to serve his own purposes. She looked directly at Daniel, and there was contempt in her eyes. Dr. Hernandez provided me with documentation this morning. The original birth records, the corrected blood type files, and a sworn affidavit about the error. I also have documentation from the State Medical Board about Gene Lab Solutions and their fraudulent practices. Your test, Mr. Walker, is worthless. Daniel was shaking his head. No. No, that can't be right. I paid for that test myself, I chose the lab. Did you? Judge Morrison raised an eyebrow. Or did someone choose it for you? Someone who perhaps had a vested interest in the outcome of this divorce? The implication hung heavy in the air. I thought about Daniel's mother, her cold eyes, her questions about my breeding. Her desire to protect the family legacy. I'm ordering an immediate court-supervised paternity test, Judge Morrison continued. It will be conducted at Metropolitan General Hospital with proper chain of custody protocols. Results will be available in 48 hours. She turned to me, and her expression softened slightly. Mrs. Walker, I apologize that you've had to endure this. No mother should have to sit in a courtroom and hear her child denied. Then she looked back at Daniel, and the steel returned. Mr. Walker, I'm also ordering you to immediately resume regular custody visits with Emma. Whether you're ready to accept it or not, the evidence suggests very strongly that she is your daughter. And 6-year-old girls need their fathers, even fathers who've behaved deplorably. The hearing was adjourned. Daniel walked out without looking at me. 2 days later, the results came back. I sat in Mrs. Chen's office, hands folded in my lap, trying not to hope too much. She read the document, then looked up at me with a smile. 99.9% probability of paternity. Daniel is Emma's biological father. I started crying. Great, heaving sobs of relief and rage and grief all mixed together. The final divorce hearing was 3 weeks later. Daniel was there, but he was different. Smaller somehow. Defeated. Judge Morrison wasted no time. Mr. Walker, the court-ordered paternity test confirms what your wife has been saying all along. Emma is your biological daughter. How do you feel about that? He was quiet for a long moment. I don't know what to feel. Well, let me tell you what I feel, the judge said, leaning forward. I feel disappointed. I feel angry that a child has been put through this trauma because her father chose to believe a fraudulent lab over the woman he married. I feel concerned about Emma's well-being and her relationship with you going forward. She paused, letting her words sink in. I'm granting Mrs. Walker primary custody. You will have supervised visitation until a court-appointed therapist determines that you can be trusted with your daughter's emotional well-being. You will pay full child support, and you will cover all therapy costs for Emma, therapy that she needs because of your actions. Daniel nodded mutely. Additionally, Judge Morrison continued, I'm ordering that you undergo counseling yourself. You need to figure out why you were so willing to believe your daughter wasn't yours, why you were so quick to abandon her. Because that tells me something about you, Mr. Walker, and it's not flattering. When we left the courtroom that day, I felt lighter than I had in months. Not happy, too much damage had been done for happiness, but lighter. Vindicated. Mrs. Chen walked me to my car. You should know, she said quietly, Judge Morrison didn't have to go that hard on him. But she has a daughter herself. I think this case hit close to home. I nodded, too emotional to speak. That evening, I sat Emma down on the couch. She was wearing her favorite pajamas, the ones with the dancing unicorns. Baby, I need to tell you something, I said, smoothing her hair back from her face. Remember how Daddy has been away for a while? She nodded, her dark eyes so serious, so much older than 6 years should allow. Well, Daddy made a mistake. He thought some things that weren't true, and he hurt us both. But we went to court. You remember I told you about the nice judge, and she helped Daddy understand that he was wrong. Is Daddy coming back? Emma asked in a small voice. Not to live with us, no. Mommy and Daddy are still getting divorced. But you're going to get to see Daddy again. And he knows now that he's your daddy, that he's always been your daddy, and that you're his little girl. Why did he think I wasn't? She asked, and the question broke my heart. Because sometimes adults make mistakes, honey. Sometimes they believe things that aren't true because they're scared or confused. But the important thing is that now he knows the truth. She was quiet for a moment, processing. Then, does he love me again? I pulled her close, breathing in the scent of her strawberry shampoo. He never stopped loving you, baby. He just forgot for a little while. But we're going to help him remember. I didn't know if that was true. I didn't know if Daniel could repair what he'd broken. But I had to believe that somehow, for Emma's sake, we'd find a way forward. Over the following months, things slowly improved. Daniel went to therapy. He showed up for his supervised visits, and gradually, I could see him trying. Really trying. It was awkward and painful, but he was making an effort. Emma, resilient as children are, began to open up to him again. It would take time, maybe years, for their relationship to heal completely. But they were talking, laughing sometimes. It was a start. As for me, I filed a formal complaint against Gene Lab Solutions, adding my voice to the dozens of other families they'd hurt. The company was permanently shut down, and several of its executives faced criminal charges. It was small comfort, but it was something. I also did some investigating of my own. With Mrs. Chen's help, I traced the payment for Daniel's original paternity test. It hadn't come from Daniel's personal account. It had come from his mother. When I confronted Daniel about it, he finally broke. She called me, he admitted, his voice hollow. She said she'd heard about a lab that could run discrete tests. She said she was just trying to protect me, to make sure I knew the truth before the marriage went too far. And you believed her? I wanted to believe her, he said quietly. God help me, Sarah, part of me wanted an excuse. The marriage was falling apart, and I was too much of a coward to end it honestly. So when she offered me this escape, this justification, I took it. It was the most honest he'd been with me in years. Did you ever actually think I'd cheated? I asked. He was quiet for a long time. No, he finally said. Deep down, I knew you hadn't. But the test gave me permission to pretend. To be the victim instead of the villain. We never got back together. Too much had been broken, too much trust destroyed. But we found a way to be civil, to co-parent, to put Emma first. Judge Morrison's intervention had saved us, saved Emma from growing up believing she was unwanted, saved me from being labeled an adulteress, saved Daniel from completely destroying his relationship with his daughter. Sometimes I wonder what would have happened if Dr. Hernandez hadn't made that call. If she hadn't remembered the blood sample mix-up, hadn't been concerned enough to investigate. We would have been just another family destroyed by lies and false evidence. Emma is 12 now. She's strong and smart and so incredibly resilient. She knows the story, age-appropriate version at least. She knows her father made a terrible mistake, but that he spent years making amends. She also knows that her mother fought for her, that there was a judge who stood up for what was right, and that the truth always matters. Last week, Emma came home from school and asked me about DNA testing. They'd been studying genetics in biology class. Mom, she said, setting down her backpack, my teacher said DNA doesn't lie. But didn't Daddy's test lie about me? I sat down next to her, choosing my words carefully. The DNA didn't lie, honey. The people running the test lied. They gave your father fake results because they were paid to. But real DNA tests, done honestly at good labs, they do tell the truth. She thought about this. So the truth was always there? We just had to find people who would tell it honestly? Exactly, I said, pulling her into a hug. That's what this whole nightmare taught me. The truth is powerful, but it's also fragile. It can be manipulated, hidden, distorted by people with agendas. But it's still there, waiting to be found by people brave enough to look for it. Judge Morrison was one of those people. Dr. Hernandez was another. And in the end, I'd like to think I was too. When Daniel stood in that courtroom and said, "The girl is not my daughter," he thought he was stating a fact. He thought he had science and evidence on his side. But he'd forgotten something crucial, that facts without integrity are just lies wearing lab coats. That truth requires more than just documents and test results. It requires honesty, investigation, and people willing to dig deeper than convenient answers. The judge knew that. She saw through the facade, questioned the evidence, and wouldn't let a child be sacrificed on the altar of a man's cowardice and a corrupt lab's greed. I'll never forget that moment when she revealed the truth, when everything shifted and Daniel's carefully constructed justification crumbled. It was terrifying and vindicating and heartbreaking all at once. But more than anything, it was justice. Not the dramatic, cinematic kind of justice where the villain gets hauled away in handcuffs. The quiet, grinding kind of justice where the truth wins out, where a mother's word is finally believed, where a daughter gets her father back even though he doesn't deserve her. These days, when Emma asks about that time, I tell her it was when I learned that fighting for the truth is always worth it, even when it's hard. Even when everyone doubts you. Even when the man who promised to love you stands up in court and denies everything you've built together. Because in the end, the truth doesn't need your belief to exist. It just needs someone brave enough to defend it. And that day, in that courtroom, with my daughter's future hanging in the balance, I found that bravery. So did a judge who'd seen too many children caught in adult games. So did a doctor who remembered one small error from 6 years ago and cared enough to make it right. Together, we saved my daughter from a lie that would have haunted her forever. When Daniel said those words, "The girl is not my daughter," he thought he was setting himself free. Instead, he just sealed his own fate and proven that sometimes, the most devastating lies are the ones we tell ourselves. The truth was always there, written in Emma's DNA, in her birth records, in the honest evidence that no corrupt lab could erase. All it needed was someone willing to look for it. And thank God, the judge did.